Hi everyone, Chris Green, the History Chap, and this is Friday, the 12th of January. Welcome to another review of British history. This is something I was doing before Christmas. I was doing it on a weekly basis, very low-key compared to my videos that I put out, my prepared videos. And this is just something that I wanted to it's just a way of keeping in touch with people, allowing people to join in with the chat as well. So if you are joining in with the chat, it'd be lovely to hear where you're coming in from, because I've got folk from all around the world. It's absolutely unbelievable. 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, I started this YouTube journey, and it was never meant to be like this. I was just sharing some live talks and videos that I've done for friends and family. And it has got bigger and bigger and bigger since then. And now, I've got folk coming in from, I know Australia, New Zealand, Philippines. I've got folk in Hong Kong, so that's all over on the Pacific side. I've got Americans, Canadians, Argentinians, and of course I've got loads of folk from the UK, Ireland as well, Germany. Ludwig, hello to you. And I've got, we've got Nathan, we've got Darren down in Australia. We've got folk from South Africa. Can't see any of them here today, but and Charlie, lovely. Thank goodness you can hear me now. I don't know why that happened. I just started just a little while ago. Didn't work. Anyway, boring old British from Charlie. I don't know where you are on Charlie. I'm looking out the window here in Worcester, and grey clouds, not raining. So I'll give that as especially around here. The River Severn is very full. Anyone who fancies going to do a tour around the battlefield at Tewkesbury, just down the road from here, just down the river from here, well, you probably need to take your boat, certainly a pair of Wellington boots to walk around there. So, so anyway, welcome all, and let's crack on. It's been a busy week. Last Sunday, I put out two videos, back-to-back videos, on the Kitchener's Desert Railway, otherwise known as the Sudan Military Railway, which obviously runs in Sudan, part of Kitchener's invasion in 1896 through to 98, where the British Anglo-Egyptian army under Lord Kitchener defeated the Mahdist army, the Khalifa's army, at the Battle of Omdurman. And the build-up was he built this railway across the desert as a way of supplying his army. And I found it fascinating. And someone pointed out, I think Nathan, don't know if you're on here, Nathan, but Nathan Appleby pointed out, isn't it amazing that Kitchener's Desert Railway was built by a Canadian, and 10 years beforehand, General Wolseley had put his faith in Canadian voyageurs, Canadian boatmen, to take his army up the Nile. So, the Canadians right in the middle of this particular expedition, both expeditions. I followed up with the Battle of Atbara, which was the first major battle that the British army fought in this reconquest of Sudan. The Egyptian army had been in action at the Battle of Firket, and also sort of at Abu Hamad, under the incredible Hector MacDonald. What an amazing Victorian soldier he was. Rose from the ranks. He was a crofter's son. He was given a commission in the Second Afghan War. The Brits had been there more than once. And he was promoted from the ranks during the Second Afghan War. By the time the Sudan campaign came around, he was a colonel. He was in the Egyptian army, seconded to the Egyptian army. And he played a pivotal role at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, where Kitchener was in such a haste to move off the battlefield and get to Omdurman before the Mahdists fell back on the city and tried to fortify it, that he basically moved before the whole Mahdist army had left the field. And as they were lined up and moving, the Mahdists descended for a second attack on his army. And it was Hector MacDonald in particular at the back who took the brunt of that. His Egyptian and Sudanese forces took the brunt of that attack. And in an amazing moment, he pivoted his troops one way and then the other to take off two different attacks that were coming in. An amazing, great one. Sad story, sad ending. He committed suicide. He was accused of being a homosexual, which in Edwardian British Empire was definitely beyond the pale at the time. And he was accused of that. Some people say it was by jealous colonialists. He was in Ceylon, Sri Lanka at the time. And he, unfortunately, he was coming back to basically face the music in London and he committed suicide in Paris. Sad ending. Anyway, well, God knows about. And then, of course, last night I had the battle, well, part of the Battle of Omdurman, but Winston Churchill's participation in the charge of the 21st Lancers, which, yeah, it seems to have done really well. I wasn't expecting it to. I was expecting to have the, oh God, we've all heard about Winston Churchill's life, followed by the, he's a great bloke, but I watched Young Winston, the film, and you're not going to teach me anything I didn't know about that. And I was also expecting, quite frankly, some people from the left of British politics who don't like Winston Churchill, and yeah, there's reasons why they wouldn't, in fairness. People from India who blame him single-handedly for causing the Bengal famine during the Second World War. And then there's always a good Afrikaner somewhere in there as well who will remind me, not necessarily of Churchill, but certainly they've got a big beef about Kitchener and the concentration camps. And again, if I was an Afrikaner and my family had been in a concentration camp, I guess I would have that view of history too, and of British involvement in South Africa. I'm a believer that we all see history. History is all about perspectives, and yeah, one person's hero is someone else's enemy, and vice versa. But there you go. So anyway, let me just have a quick look at all the comments that are coming in, because this is an opportunity to talk in a way that we don't talk on those pre-prepared videos that I release. Okay, so greetings from Arkansas. Hello, Harry. Great supporter, and I really appreciate your support, Harry. Jen Ingle, yes, another one of my great supporters. Jen, it's lovely to see you. We've got David, New Zealand. I don't know if that's David in New Zealand or that's your surname, but if you're in New Zealand, greetings to you. Lovely to have you on board. One of my most popular videos last year was about Charles Upham, VC, or VC and Bar, one of only 3 men to have received the Victoria Cross twice, and that seems to have gone down very well, especially with my Kiwi supporters, but also quite a few of the Aussies, which I am surprised about. Remember to tickle the like button. Thank you very much, Charlie. The Zulu War today began on the 12th of January, 1879. Oh, you're beating me to it. That guy from Kelty Alpha, thank you very much. Dalton, hello to you too. Lovely for your support. Thank you. David from Spain. I'm just going to try and go back up because loads of you are commenting. Manila checking in. Jan, very good to see you. Another supporter. It's lovely to see so many regular people here. Thank you very much indeed. Those of you who are thinking you're going to get one of my pre-prepared videos here, it's not happening. This is a bit of a free-for-all. This is my jazz moment in the week. So, you know, if this is not your cup of tea, don't unsubscribe or give me a thumbs down. Just go and find one of my other pre-prepared videos to watch. But for those of you who like all of this, stay tuned. Angus from Australia, another great person who's supported me a lot of time. Great story about Montemorse at Omdurman. Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed. I enjoyed researching the 3 stories that I've done this week. I love the bit that the last, well, not the last survivor, but Trooper Byrne, who died in Kent in 1944, had one of the survivors from the charge of the 21st Lancers. He had one of the survivors at his funeral, and it was Winston Churchill. I stand to be corrected, but Winston Churchill, who died in 1963, 64, off the top of my head, could be the very last survivor. Could have been the very last survivor of the charge of the 21st Lancers at Omdurman. If anyone can tell me, definitely, that's fine. I'm sure someone's going to tell me which year. Was it 63, 64? I know he was born in 1874. Do we have any Churchill aficionado who can tell me the particular year here? 1965 was it? Oh, well, there you go. I'm completely wrong, wasn't I? Just goes to prove the History Chap does not spew dates. In fact, actually, dates are not one of my fortes in history. It's the stories and what happened that are. But so, yeah, 1965, a couple of people coming in on that one. Thank you very much. What I do know is he died on the very date, or not the year, obviously, but the very day of the year that his father died. Interesting. And couple of people were commenting actually in that last night's video, the charge at the Battle of Omdurman by the 21st Lancers, and just saying, what a life Churchill lived, and he did, and he's a controversial character. But then, if you think about it, he was actually in effectively frontline British politics for the best part of 60 years, and quite frankly, you would make some controversial decisions if you were a politician in 60 years. Wouldn't you? If you were a football manager of Arsenal, Manchester United for 60 years, you would have made some controversial decisions, got rid of players that you shouldn't have got rid of, played different formations. Actually, 60 years is a long time. And funny enough, I was talking to my mother today about this. I'm a good son, I keep in touch. And we were talking about this. I said, Churchill, 60 years, okay? You take someone like, and I'm not asking you to like them, but in our current political leadership in Britain, David Cameron, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer. 20 years ago, most of them weren't in Parliament. 20 years. Churchill was there for 60. In fact, if you look at the length of time that, say, Boris was in Parliament and then got out of Parliament, that was the period that Churchill basically was from entering Parliament to just after the First World War, middle of the 1920s, around the general strike. It's like, and then nearly 20 years later, he became Prime Minister, led Britain through the war for 5 years, lost the general election, and then blow me down, 6 years after that, came back as Prime Minister again. By then, he finished his premiership in his 80s. If you look at that, that is like, and again, there's going to be horror, people throwing their hands up in horror. That is like Britain going to war now and John Major coming back to be the wartime leader. Or in Americans' case, George Bush Sr. coming back as president. It is just balmy. As I say, controversial character, a man of his times, but also, a brave man. I mean, he was under fire. He actually went under fire in the northwest frontier of India, Sudan, which we talked about last night, the Boer War, rather controversially, because he was supposed to be a war correspondent, and he was running around with his favourite Mauser pistol, directing British troops. And funny enough, when he got captured, the Boers really didn't buy the I'm a war correspondent story. And then don't forget, for good measure, after his major strategic blunder, really, with Gallipoli and the Dardanelles campaign, he was forced out of the government, and he served on the Western Front during the First World War. That, if nothing else, is a heck of an achievement. And I'm not asking all our politicians to have a similar service record, but I'm not sure many of them do. Not like that. It's quite amazing. Anyway, let me just stop. Massacre at Patna. Yep. Martin, how much French? Oh God, where are we at now? Invisible Ray, Churchill, 1874 to 1965. Entered Parliament 1900. On the back, by the way, of that escape, he was captured by the Boers. He had a famous escape. Stories vary, because the story that Churchill put out was that he had this, he escaped over the wall of the prison, and his comrades who he should have been escaping with didn't join him, and therefore he had this, he fled through the Transvaal and got to the neutral Portuguese territory of what's now Mozambique. And he became a hero. Other stories said that he actually got over the wall and cleared off without waiting for his comrades, who interestingly never got over the wall anyway. Who knows? Churchill did spin stories to his own advantage. He was a great storyteller, great raconteur. If you read things like his early life, and also the history of the English-speaking peoples, he has a great storytelling style. Interesting bloke. But anyway, that escape just after Black Week in the Boer War, where the British had this major shock. They were the leading empire of the world. They came up against the Boers, and in the space of a week, the Boers defeated the British army 3 times. And if ever there was a way to smack your public confidence back in Britain, that was it. And the press dubbed it Black Week. And just on the back of Black Week, Winston Churchill has this bid for freedom, escapes from a Boer prison camp, crosses enemy territory and ends up in Mozambique, and then comes down and joins the British again in the Natal colony in South Africa. And he became a popular hero. And on the back of that, he was elected Member of Parliament in the 1900 election, Member of Parliament in Oldham in Lancashire. He was elected for the Conservatives. And of course, those of you who know his political history, he then crossed the floor a few years later, joined the Liberal Party, and was a significant member of the Liberal administration, running into the First World War and through the First World War. And then in the 1920s, he jumped across again and joined the Conservative Party. And he was by the 1930s. We always remember him as the man who had spotted that Hitler was dangerous. Something that, of course, he very much put himself centre stage in his book, The Gathering Storm, about the build-up to the Second World War. But don't forget, up until 1939, he was seen as a maverick. He was seen very much as out for himself, in a way that, if I use modern parlance, a lot of people would view Boris Johnson as being absorbed in himself. I think a lot of people in the 1930s saw Churchill in a very similar light, especially in his own party. He was seen as out of step. He was opposing Indian independence, even that where the majority of the Conservative Party were grudgingly maybe, but accepting that some form of self-government was going to have to go to India. And he was standing out there in some sort of Victorian, bastion of Victorianism. And he was seen as out of touch. He had supported Edward VIII. He actually talked about having a king's party to support Edward VIII in the abdication crisis. So not surprisingly, at the beginning of the Second World War, he was seen as a bit of an old fart. Don't forget, he was late 60s by then, 65, so he was past retirement age. And a lot of the Conservative Party, with all that flip-flopping between them, Liberals back again, his stance on India, his stance on the Edward VIII, and indeed his attacks on the Conservative administration of Baldwin and Chamberlain during the appeasement era, meant that a lot of the Conservative Party really would want anyone apart from Churchill as their leader. And won't go into it all now, but it's amazing how actually when he became Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain remained leader of the Conservative Party. And he only became Prime Minister fundamentally because the Labour Party said, we're going to get behind Churchill, rather than Lord Halifax, who was the preferred candidate of the Conservative establishment. And those of you who've watched the Churchill film, whose name I've just totally forgotten now, is Darkest Hour, Finest Hour. You might have seen some of that debate going on there. Anyway, back here, I just want to see what's going on in the. That was complete jazz. I was just going to say, I was only going to mention the 3 videos, and we've already done 20 minutes or thereabouts talking about Winston Churchill off the top of my head. Winston was a warrior. He certainly was. Well portrayed by Simon Ward in Young Winston. Yes, it was. And it was a very faithful reconstruction, that film, to his book, My Early Life, up there. Okay. Most Aussies don't rate Churchill because of Gallipoli. Yeah. And a Czech friend also talks about abandoning Poland in World War II. I think your Czech friend, I think you're right there, hammer down under. I think he's got his facts wrong. It was Chamberlain who abandoned Poland at the beginning of World War II, and abandoned the Czechs as well, for that matter. But certainly Churchill has a massive part to play in Gallipoli, which in one respect was, as an idea, a strategic idea, quite good, just really badly delivered. Not least, actually, and let's give credit where it's due, because the Turks actually turned up to have a fight. And I think this is a perspective thing, isn't it? We always believe that the Gallipoli and the Dardanelles campaign was a failure because the British, in particular, or the British leadership under Churchill, had messed it up. But actually, we forget that actually, if you were a Turk, you'd probably view it as the British and the Australians and others landed, and your grandfathers and great-grandfathers turned up and gave as good as they got defending their homeland, which is what most people want to do, isn't it? So there you go. I'm also reading an interesting book called The Line in the Sand at the moment. and there was an alternative landing. There was an alternative potential landing, roughly where, if you come round the coast, if you're looking at a map of Turkey, you come all the way down into the Mediterranean, come round to where it joins, sort of where it turns, and the Syrian border is. And there were a lot of people in the British establishment, military establishment in Egypt, who believed that was a better landing place. And basically the French vetoed it because they had their eyes on Syria. And indeed, they ended up with Syria after the First World War. And fundamentally, they didn't think, whilst they were allies, they didn't really trust the British, which is interesting, of course, because the British didn't really trust the French either for a large part of the war. And the French, according to the line in the sand book, the French vetoed that landing because they didn't want the British anywhere near the area that they wanted as their zone of influence. So interesting. Gallipoli might not have happened had the British decided to ignore the French. But, you do what your allies want you to do, don't you? That's part of why you're allies. Where are we did? Oh, God, we got a whole thing about didn't Wyatt Earp die in the 1920s? Lord only knows. And someone else is saying Doc Holliday. Gosh, right, okay. Wyatt Earp, apart from the name, I don't know much about him. But blimey, the history chap. I've got enough cut out on my plate just trying to deal with British history, for goodness sake. I can't be going over into the United States and dealing with US history and the history of the Wild West. Fascinating though it would be. And if any of you are that passionate and want to set up a YouTube channel about the history of the Wild West and wondering how you could start, I'm always here to help. Blimey, I'm learning as I go, but I'm always here to help with, other people bring their stories to YouTube. That's not a big deal for me. Oh God, we've really got it going on here. Poor Chamberlain. I'm going to Montenegro. Okay, Montenegro. Gallipoli, Leslie's leaping in here. Leslie, nice to see you, mate. Gallipoli was not Sir Winston's fault. The attack was telegraphed by. Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Leslie. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, don't forget, here's an interesting thing around the whole Gallipoli Dardanelles campaign, and this is around national narratives and perspectives. There were more British troops there than there were Australians and New Zealanders. It's just that the British, our whole national narrative is all about the fields of Flanders, isn't it? Those of us who are British. It's all about the poppies and the Western Front and the fruitlessness of the mud and everything on the Western Front, and static lines and throwing hundreds of thousands of men into battles. Different perspective is from Australians and New Zealanders, who see it as a defining moment in their life is Gallipoli. And yeah, just an interesting perspective. And of course, Brits, we, because of that whole fixation of the Western Front, we forget that British soldiers were involved not just at Gallipoli, but on the Salonika front in Greece, fighting principally the Bulgarians. We forget that they were in Italy on the Italian front, fighting the Austro-Hungarian Empire with various German elements. We forget they were in Mesopotamia, fighting the Ottomans, modern-day Iraq. We forget they were in Sinai and Palestine. Battle of Rafah happened this week in 1917. British involved there. And of course, Rafah still very much in the news in the Gaza Strip. We forget that they, of course, were also in German East Africa. And there were British elements or British commanding elements, Commonwealth troops, Empire troops in Cameroon and, very briefly, Togo as well. And of course, there were South African troops involved in Southwest Africa, as well as in German East Africa. Of course, Jan Smuts became the commander there of the Imperial troops. And there were a variety of other very small encounters taking place up Papua New Guinea or German New Guinea, Samoa, and of course the various naval actions all around the world, at the Falklands, at Coronel, and indeed the search for the Emden and the Dresden as well in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, respectively. Let me just see where else we've got here. So God knows how I got onto that one. That was Gallipoli, wasn't it? Leslie, I blame you for that one, mate. Coming in late. Thought it was 65. Thank you, Paddy. You're absolutely right. I think you're in the majority. Chris Green in the minority. Well, I wasn't. I got a pass and I was on Mastermind and I would have answered. And you'd all been sitting in the chair thinking, oh my God, he's got it wrong. Thank you from today's Martin Withers' birthday, the man who flew the first Black Buck raid. Interesting. Hereward Radio, Falklands War, make an interesting topic. It would, considering it. The only thing that holds me back on the Falklands War is there are a lot of people who were down there who certainly have their own stories, their own perspectives, and there is a danger that I'm just opening up basically opening myself low hanging fruit as I describe events that they have a different recollection of. So just need to do that one sensitively. Also sensitive for some of my Argentinian supporters as well, because again, it's about perspectives, isn't it? All of us patriotic Brits, we have a very clear view on the Falklands. If we exchanged seats and sat in Buenos Aires and we were patriotic Argentinians, our family had lived in Argentina for 150 years, 200 years, I wonder what our perspective would be. And that's the thing I try and teach some of the younger folk that I deal with is history is all about perspectives. And before you think I'm going all woke on you, all right, I am not going woke. I am saying we have perspectives. If you want me to be ultra the other way, the Colston statue in Bristol, that was put up. People had a perspective of Colston. People had a perspective of slavery, in fact, back in those days, which is totally different to where we are now. Two different points of view. Neither right, neither wrong. But it's how the world turns. Where we came, I'm Australian. My grandfather served as a horsebreaker in Egypt in World War One. Interesting. And again, we forget generally that how many Australians actually fought in the campaign, especially in the Sinai. And of course, that leads me to one of the subjects I will be covering. For those of you down under, I will be doing the cavalry charge at Beersheba later this year. One of the great cavalry charge. But of course, that whole invasion through Sinai into Palestine, that actually has created part of the world we've got today, very much in the headlines today. And I'm not saying the British are to blame. I'm saying the British had a part to play. If there was still an Ottoman Empire today, I guess there wouldn't be a state of Israel, would there? We'd have had other things. I'm a great believer, alternate histories. Maybe I should do a special alternate history session on this one day as a bit of a live for a laugh, and we can have a debate. But we take a historic debate or a historic moment, and we will just say, what if certain things happened? How would things have turned out? But I'm always those of you old enough, and I reckon most of us are, to have watched the film Back to the Future. Do you remember when Marty goes back into the 1950s from the 1980s and he's got his family photo? And if you remember, he's trying to get his dad together with his mum. But unfortunately, his mum takes a shine to Marty. Interesting, weird. And as she's taking a shine to Marty and pushing his dad out of the picture, he gets his photograph out and the photograph starts to fade. Because obviously, if you think about it, if he was back in the 50s, married his mum, he wouldn't have been born, would it? And I think sometimes with alternate histories, we get really excited. Like, if Britain hadn't gone in the First World War, all those young men would have been saved. True. Between 1914 and 18, very true. Would there have been some sort of war that Britain might have ended up fighting with the Germans at some stage in the future? Who knows? Would the world look better than it does now? Don't know. What very often we do with alternate histories is we like to say, oh, everything that's good in the world at the minute, if we just change that bit and made it even better, wouldn't that be good? But of course, by changing that decision in 1914 to go to war, everything changes after that, for better or worse. Anyway, blimey, that's a bit heavy for 1:30 on a Friday afternoon at the beginning of January. I mean, anyone would think I've got grey clouds out here. So let me just quickly look here. Are you planning to do a video on the Battle of Sedgemoor? Yes. I do want to this year come back inside the British Isles a little bit more and tell a few more stories so we won't be on colonial campaigns. There was going to be a fair few battles, because you can tell that's the sort of prism I see a lot of events through, but maybe some social stuff as well, the odd social event as well. Funny enough, someone asked me, I know on here I've talked about in the past, the history of highwaymen in Britain, which has got nothing to do with battles, but Dick Turpin, and several of the other characters, and the Wicked Lady, and Lady Ferris, who was an interesting character in her own right. And of course, there's a film, black and white film, about the Wicked Lady many years ago. Some people might remember it. So the answer, Lord Lansdowne, yes. Am I going to do Battle of Sedgemoor? Absolutely. I'm also going to be doing the 1745 Jacobite Rebellion. And indeed, I'm going to cover the first Jacobite Rebellion as well for the Old Pretender. I'm going to be running a series in February about the English Civil War. That's actually going to be off YouTube. But so if you're interested in that, by all means, go onto my website, historychap.com, sign up for my newsletter, and you'll be kept abreast of that. It's probably going to be something like 5 talks about the English Civil War, not just the battles, but actually the surrounding bits. Why did it start, and then indeed what was the outcome? Cromwell and the Protectorate, and indeed the Restoration. Why did the Protectorate fail? So yeah, looking forward to quite a few field trips on that one. Easy peasy. I've got the Battle of Worcester just down the road here. We've got Battle of Stowe just over in the Cotswolds, which I can take my good lady to because there's some good shops there. So while I faff about doing history, she can do lots of interior design. We've got Edge Hill, not a million miles away. Naseby, been to Naseby a few years ago. It's a good site, very unspoiled, very unchanged. So anyway, I'll be taking some talks on the English Civil War as well. Just whizzing down here, Tolkien did serve on the Somme. I'm actually thinking, funny enough, who's talked about Tolkien? Charlie. I'm actually thinking about doing a talk on Tolkien because a lot of the stuff in the Lords of the Rings, the massive battles, were inspired by what he saw and the troop movements on the Western Front, supposedly. So I want to do a bit of research on that. But fascinating character as well, because of course he was a real expert on Anglo-Saxon England, which is another area I'd like to go into and do a few more talks about, the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. Okay, don't know if that interests anyone. Certainly one of the areas I'm interested in. I'm always interested. And maybe as well, how about Boudica? How about the Roman invasion of Britain? Not often that Britain were on the receiving end of invasions, but actually, that whole invasion and what Britain was like in those days. And of course, coming out of that, we've got Boudica. When the Romans left Britain, then we had a totally new part of our history where, of course, the Angles and Saxons arrived. And there was a development of England, but obviously ongoing wars. Now we have King Arthur. Hey, that'd be a good one to do a video on, wouldn't it? Hey, and I tell you what, there's a lot of folk out there who've got a real beef about King Arthur and where he was based, who he was. I could open a whole can of worms on that one. But then it fascinates me the development of England, but also equally, actually, I'm fascinated by the history at this time in what you'd call, I don't know, you can't call it the Anglo-Saxon period, can you? Because if you were Welsh or Scottish, it wasn't Anglo-Saxon; they weren't there. But the birth of Scotland around the same period as the birth of England, and indeed the ongoing story of Wales. Wales history at this time is actually fascinating, bonkers, but fascinating. Everyone was interrelated, all the different royal families, and some really good stories there actually, which I have told in the past. Again, off YouTube with my History Chap community through my website. Boudica is a well-told story. I don't know if you mean that's a well-told story by me or it's been covered loads and loads of times, Invisible Raid. Maybe just stick your view in there if you can. I've got to do some on-location stuff. Invisible Ray, it's you again. Go to Sudan. Funny enough, I've actually worked in Sudan about 12 years ago, something like that. Lovely place. I mean, it's very interesting. And very interesting as well, people's perspectives of the British and General Gordon and indeed Kitchener. Because if you talk to people who don't like the British Empire, generally, like in Britain, we were obviously there mowing them down, nicking everything we could from Sudan, etc. That's their view, not mine. If you talk to a lot of Sudanese, I mean, a lot of Sudanese do have relatives who died at Omdurman. If you look at the numbers, there would, by its very nature, there's a lot of people who would have died at Omdurman who've got descendants or relatives in Sudan now. So probably not absolutely brilliantly loving the British, but actually interesting just how many, especially the older ones, actually said, actually British rule probably wasn't as crap as everyone makes it out to be. Interesting. And I wasn't there in a history capacity at that time. So I was there on a business capacity. And there's no reason for them to tell me that otherwise. Anyway, Roman history, yes. Arthur was Irish. Here we go. Invisible Ray. You're gonna be I'm gonna bring you out as a joker every now and then just to play the Invisible Ray card to see what everyone does. And the Welsh. He was Irish and Welsh. I think that means yeah. Okay, thank you. Going to explore some Roman gold mines this week. Awesome, blimey. Plenty of inbreeding. Yes, there was. Thank you. Sorry, this is sound like this is Invisible Ray. Other people, you better chime in, otherwise Ray and I are going to be having this private conversation. And Brittany has claims to Arthur too. Hooray! Paddy, well done for throwing that one in. Off we go. That's like lighting a blue touch paper. Yeah, I thought Invisible Ray might have a comment coming back straight away. You think the Empire is coming back into fashion again? Yeah. There's certainly a lot of people. There's a lot of noise out there, and sometimes you forget that the people who make a lot of noise don't necessarily represent the majority of thinking. They just make a lot of noise. And yeah, it's interesting with the empire. Anyway, guys and girls, let me share with you what happened in British history this week. Okay. I hope you've been joining this, and by all means, keep throwing your comments in. As you can see, I do keep looking down and trying to see what's going on. And good afternoon to you, to the underwater cabbage salesman. That's a great tag, sign-on tag, whatever we call them here in YouTube. Thank you. Harry, I'd like to learn more about the English in South America. Great one. I've actually got coming up this year, or hoping to come up, two straight specifically on that. Okay, one is going to be on the English Legion, ex Napoleonic Wars veterans who fought in South America for the independence movement of Simon Bolivar in the 1820s, 1830s. So that one's coming up. I'm also going to do a couple of the naval commanders down there. We had several naval commanders who went to left the Royal Navy and served in the independence movement in that part of the world. Also thought we could do the occupation of Buenos Aires, the British occupation of Buenos Aires in 1806, which not many people know about. Again, probably one or two of my Argentinian viewers will know about because it's right on their doorstep. But anyway, excuse me. Good story about the Bolivar Brits. Yeah. Okay. As I say, yeah, and in particular, they were involved. As I say, the English legions. There were some rum characters went down there as well. Some interesting chances. What about the Mad Queen of Madagascar? Yes. Again on my list, but probably quite low down. I'll be honest. I'm getting so many suggestions and so many great suggestions. And then, of course, when I do my research, I suddenly come across stories where I think, wow. And several of you got really excited from the Omdurman one from last night, from the Charge of the 21st, where talking about the Mad Mullah in British Somaliland. And yeah, I was going to do that one anyway, because a Victoria Cross is awarded to one of the Guffs, family Guff surname. And that was one of the only three father-son Victoria Cross recipients that are the Guffs, the Cockgreaves, and the Roberts, of course, Field Marshal Lord Roberts of Kandahar, VC in India, and then his son was awarded posthumously the VC in, or wasn't awarded posthumously. I think he was recommended for it while he was dying in the Boer War after the Battle of Colenso, wasn't it? And then yeah, anyway, Harry, sorry, I'm just reading here. I am curious, which PM, Lord Pomeroy or Pitt the Elder? Not sure what that's about. Albert Ball, thank you, Leslie. Albert Ball is most certainly on my list. I want to talk about a little bit about. Do you know what's really interesting? Actually, my YouTube videos about First World War stuff get lower views as a sort of a genre than anything else, and yet I find the First World War absolutely fascinating. So it's a little bit of a kick in the whatsits when I put a really good story together about the First World War and no fucker watches it. The VAD women, the nurses in the First World War. I thought it was a fascinating story. Fascinating story. Violet Jessup, she was on the Titanic, survives the Titanic, gets on the sister ship Britannic, and that's blinking. That hits a mine in the Aegean Sea in the First World War, and also on another ship, another VAD nurse actually rescued a young sailor. Oh, sorry, young soldier on their way to Egypt. Again, I think they got torpedoed, might have been mined, can't remember now. Pulls him off, rescues him. This woman rescues this young British soldier. Happens to be Jack Cohen, founder of Tesco supermarkets. Yeah, great stories there. Anyway, Henry Blogg, I just love the name. Jen Ingle. Yes, I did. Jen, you've got some really interesting stories you've recommended to me as well, including a town in East Anglia where there was an outbreak of bubonic plague a lot later than the plague that came in Britain. Interesting. Why do Scotland, Welsh, and English national saints not come from the UK? Well, actually, just a really good question, QA Library. Just as a point of reference there, the Welsh patron saint, Saint David, does come from the UK. He comes from Wales. In fact, he's the only one of the four British Isles patron saints who actually represents the country he was born in. Patrick, of course, actually came from Wales. So Patrick at least is British Isles for Ireland. But Andrew and George, long story about patron saints. Maybe that's one I should do, actually, because it is fascinating, isn't it? Those of you who are interested in patron saints, dig out my video about, I haven't got it in here, I don't know why I'm pointing down at the thing, about Saint Edmund. Edmund, the king and martyr of England, the original patron saint of England, never officially called that, but he was the revered saint. Anglo-Saxon king of East Anglia, who was either killed in battle by the Vikings or martyred by the Vikings. Depends who you read. Strange enough, the church go down the latter one. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle went down the first one. But there you go. Lads, Sarah Jane. My granddad was part of the Church Lads Brigade in World War One. Would love to hear about them. Ooh, what, the Lads Brigade? Or your granddad in particular? I'm assuming you mean the Lads Brigades. St. Amadus, patron saint of Ghent in Flanders, was from Ireland. I tell you what, they did travel around. Interestingly, St. Boniface, I'm not sure if he's the patron saint of Germany. He certainly is credited with, I think, introducing Christianity to Germany. He came from Devon in England. So there you go, St. Boniface. Arthur Vickers, oh my lord, this is all getting out of hand. I've opened a can of worms here about saints. Maybe I should do something about saints. What do you think? I mean, I know I do a lot of the battle stuff, but would you just like to hear me trawl back a bit more into British history? I'm not really into Anne Boleyn and some of that stuff, but I think there's some fascinating stories there. Anyway, I said I would cover what happened this week in British history. Do you think it's about time I did that? 7th of January, let's kick off. This is back on Sunday, isn't it? 7th of January, 1558. The English lose Calais. Calais had been in the possession of the English since 1347, during the 100 Years' War. Obviously a bone of contention, although the French sort of accepted that Calais wasn't theirs. In fact, Calais sent members of parliament to England, to London. There was you can't call them parliamentary constituencies particularly. It didn't quite work like that in those days. But they used to send members to Parliament in England during the Middle Ages and early Tudor period. Mary Tudor became Queen of England, Henry VIII's daughter from his first marriage. She married King Philip of Spain, same King Philip who later sent the Spanish Armada against Mary's half-sister, Elizabeth. Spain was at war with France, and basically Mary supported that war, and so the French attacked Calais. Totally overwhelming force, something like 27,000 French versus an English garrison of about 5,000. It was the siege of Calais. They eventually surrendered, really couldn't hold out. And most of the English, after a bit of a rough night of living under occupation, were taken to boats the next day by the French and told to, bye-bye, England's over that way. And there you go. Invisible Ray. I haven't got a clue on that one, mate. Maybe someone else. Best not wear your Oliver Cromwell t-shirt if you cover the sieges of Waterford and Wexford, not to mention Drogheda. Anyway, thank you very much, Paddy. Saw an interesting talk about Drogheda recently. But anyway, that's by the by. So Calais, on the Sunday, or not Sunday, but on the 7th of January, 1558, Calais, the last English foothold on mainland Europe, in France, was lost to France. So there you go. It's been French ever since. And Leslie just put in the sacrifice of the garrison at Calais in the spring of 1940. Funnily enough, that's also being, I'm getting requests left, right and centre, Leslie. That's on my hit list. Quite frankly, I'm trying, quite digression. We'll get back into the dates in a minute. I'm really trying to work out how I manage to churn out more stuff for you, because there's so much I want to cover. It's just taking a lot of time. I was talking to a couple of people earlier today about how they might be able to assist me with things like editing videos, because that's a bit of a ball's ache. Researching, actually, if I had some good researchers, that would be quite good. Probably want to keep script writing to myself, only because it has my style to it. You can have AI. AI will write you a script for YouTube now. Can you believe that? You don't need a secretary or a PA or a short-time typist or anything like that. You basically tell AI what, I want to do a thing about the siege of the garrison at Calais in spring 1940, and it brings something up. Very generic and very not Chris Green, the history chap. So I'd like to keep that twisting. Anyway, where are we at? 8th of January, 871. Going back a fair time in English history here, or British history. The Battle of Ashdown in Berkshire. It pitted the army of Wessex against the Great Heathen Army of Vikings. Without going into the whole of the Viking invasion of Britain, basically by this stage, there was only one kingdom left standing, or of any significance, or of any authority in England. It was Wessex. The Vikings had taken out East Anglia. Edmund the Martyr, who I just mentioned just now, all part of this storyline. Edmund the Martyr, Northumbria had fallen to them. Mercia had effectively basically paid them off. They'd lost some territory and were cowering from the Vikings, and that really just left Wessex. And obviously the Vikings thought, Last Kingdom, as Bernard Cornwell will call it, let's go for it. And this all covers into some of the Last Kingdom stories that Bernard Cornwell, those of you who are fans of that, and the Last Kingdom series on Netflix. But we got to the Battle of Ashdown, where, interestingly, it was fought by Alfred the Great, but not when he was king. Alfred was Prince Alfred at the time, and it was his brother, King Aethelred, who was King of Wessex. And together they commanded the Wessex army at the Battle of Ashdown. And they were only a few days beforehand. In fact, was it 8th? I think it was the 4th of January. Their army, as in the Wessex army, had been defeated outside of Reading. Now, basically, the Viking army were coming to finish them off. And in a complete reversal, the army of Wessex defeated the Viking army at the Battle of Ashdown, and certainly put the brakes at that stage on a full-out assault on Wessex by the Great Heathen Army of the Vikings. So there you go. Jen saying, definitely do not use AI. Trust me, Jen, I ain't going there. I need like a human touch, a bit like this. AI couldn't do this, could it? Can you imagine, with all the comments you guys are putting in here, how AI would probably explode or something, wouldn't it? Same date, 8th of January, 1815. So we just celebrated Wessex defeating the Vikings. Hurrah! 8th of January, 1815, Battle of New Orleans. The Yanks get one over on the Brits on this one quite decisively. It was in the so-called War of 1812, which went on till 1815. So an interesting title of a war, but hey, lots of these weird titles around. But the British tried to land a significant force at New Orleans. New Orleans was defended. Something like 8,000 British were landed, or were in the army, the invasion force. New Orleans defended by about 6,000 Americans under the command of Andrew Jackson, and basically inflicted a stunning defeat on the British forces. Something like 300 died, about 1,200 were wounded, and just over 400 British soldiers were captured. Obviously, some of those were probably wounded as well. But it was the last action of the War of 1812. Actually, an action that didn't need to take place. The peace treaty had been signed in Ghent, in modern-day Belgium, and it was making its way by ship across the North Atlantic. And in the meantime, the British had instigated this landing at New Orleans. A little bit of controversy. Did the British know that there was a treaty on its way and were trying to almost position themselves in an even more advantageous position for when the treaty arrived, or not? We don't know. But anyway, it was one of those moments in history which you could argue should never have happened. Certainly, the big winner from this, apart from the United States defeating Britain, was Andrew Jackson. He was now seen as the hero of the young republic. Did his political career no harm, as President Jackson he was to be. But anyway, things have moved on since then. Blood is thicker than water, as was famously said at the storming of the Taku Forts in China. And Britain and America tend to have a lot more in common than we have apart. Or at least I think so. But then I'm a bit of an American fan. Just think they're nice people. Well, not all of them, but then there's plenty of Brits that I wouldn't want to spend a night with either. 9th of January. Let me just quickly look at what's going on. What are people saying? Go Wessex. David, New Zealand, off to bed. It's 3 a.m. here. Well, thank you very much, David, for even joining us in the first place. Very much appreciate that. Invisible Ray, do I think any kid at school these days has heard of King Alfred and the Cakes? Probably not. Or Robert the Bruce and the Spider, or Florence Nightingale? No. They've probably all heard of Mary Seacole, though, haven't they? Hey. Go on, Ray. Throw one in on that one. Wouldn't mind. I've got it in pipeline, by the way, to do a Florence Nightingale talk. Not purely about Florence Nightingale, nor to compare her with Mary Seacole. There was a series of, as I call them, the Sisters of Mercy, who went to the Crimea. It wasn't just Florence Nightingale, and it sure as heck wasn't just Mary Seacole operating her boarding house in the Crimea as a business venture, I hasten to add. But the one that I really love is Betsy Cadwallader. And those of you who are Welsh can say it much better than me. She came from North Wales. She was a feisty old. She was a nurse. She was a trained nurse. She was a feisty old devil. And strange enough, everyone goes on about the fact that Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole didn't particularly get on. Well, I tell you now, Betsy Cadwallader and Florence Nightingale did not get on, and that was a personality thing, possibly a bit of class as well, and a little bit of regional going on. North Wales versus London high society, or reasonably high society. But amazing woman, and I'd love to tell a bit of her story as well, because interestingly, the North Welsh Hospital Trust, based at Bangor in North Wales, is the Betsy Cadwallader Trust. So her name lives on, and it would be good for people to understand what the hell she did. Who was she, and how she fitted into the Crimean War, and indeed Florence Nightingale. History debunked. Yeah, I'm aware of History Debunked. Quite frankly, I don't have time to watch any other. I watch a bit of Mark Felton. Don't watch History Debunked just because I don't have time. Watch a bit of Redcoat History, like Christian Parkinson. Think he's a nice bloke. We met at the Clash of Empires exhibition last year in London. Yeah, nice bloke. Talk about the Catholic nuns from Ireland. You're absolutely right, David Clayton. And again, what I call the Sisters of Mercy. So we've so far got Calais lost. So actually, it's not a good result so far, is it? We've got the English lose Calais. The Wessex beat the Vikings, and now the British are defeated at New Orleans. Let's see where we go from there. How can the world get any better? Well, it can't, because on the 9th of June, 1799, sorry, 9th of June, 9th of January, 1799, income tax is levied for the first time. Hooray! This was Pitt the Younger, who was present Prime Minister of Britain at the time. Pitt the Younger. He introduced this income tax to fund the war with revolutionary France. We weren't even at Napoleon by this stage. He funded to fund the war with revolutionary France. If I look down my nose, it was 2 pence in the pound for incomes under £60 in those days, and 2 shillings in the pound for anyone with an income of over £200, which in today's money is around 200 grand. So, that was the top rate tax, super tax, was 2 shillings in the pound. He hoped for £10 million in that first year of 1799 through to 1800. He actually collected 6 million. So, a bit of a flop. It was repealed. Income tax was actually repealed in 1816 after the wars with France, because that was the reason they'd been introduced, to pay for the wars. And the Prime Minister in 1816 said, well, the wars are no longer here, we'll repeal it. Reintroduced in 1842 by Robert Peel, another Prime Minister, and it's stayed with us ever since in one form or other. Invisible Ray, I need dramatic theme tune like Mark Felton. Yeah. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. Thank you very much for that one. That'd be quite good, wouldn't it? QA Library, income tax was only meant to be temporary. Yeah, as I say, up until 1816, and then but it resurfaced 1842. Like a lot of government powers, they get introduced and never quite get taken away. In fairness, what we call nanny state in Britain nowadays, or sorry, some people call nanny state in Britain nowadays, a lot of it is a throwback to the Second World War. Powers that were taken by government, things that were introduced by government for the war effort, for the common good, which have never gone away since, and indeed stuff from the First World War too. Right, very quickly, 9th of January 1806, Admiral Lord Nelson's state funeral at St Paul's Cathedral. I'm trying to find things that the Brits get a bit of a win here for, aren't I, really? But let's go on. 10th of January, this is one I like. 10th of January 1840, the penny post is introduced, a uniform postal system for Britain. Obviously, there'd been postal systems before then. It very much was hit and miss. All operated locally. It depended, local rates depended on where you're going to send it in the country. So if you wanted to send something from Exeter to London, it was going to cost you a lot more than if you sent it from Exeter to Truro or Exeter to Taunton. Also, the receiver used to have to pay. So some people refused to pay. So effectively, the postal service were transporting goods, items, and someone wouldn't refuse to pay at the other end. So they were out of pocket. They'd done a whole transporting thing and no one had paid them. So a man called Rowland Hill introduced a new uniform penny post. It would cost 1 penny to send a letter anywhere in Britain. And the sender was responsible for paying. And they would pay by buying a 1 penny adhesive stamp that would go on the envelope. And that very first stamp, or the very first thing, was what is known in stamp collectors as the penny black, 1 penny black. And yeah, it's one of those little things I always got in my mind. I'm a simple soul. Talk a lot, but simple soul. And I really would love, I'd like to have an envelope with a penny black on. They're not very expensive to buy, depending which ones you get, but it's just one of those, not for any great investment or anything. I just think it'd be quite cool to own one. I used to be a stamp collector when I was younger. Funny enough, used to keep stamps from South Africa, Southwest Africa, Rhodesia, and those were the countries that I collected, not Namibia and Zimbabwe. And this was all back sort of pre 1980 sort of stuff. Anyway, Hereward has said, with the post office being such a big story currently, oh yes, I would love to see a complete history of the British postal system. Ooh, interesting. Oh, that's piqued my interest. Did you know, by the way, that in Victorian times, if you posted a letter first class in London in the morning, it would be delivered in the afternoon. We're not talking about next day delivery, or as it now is, maybe next day delivery. It was there in the afternoon. Now, that was in London. If you were using my example earlier, if you were in Exeter trying to get something to Truro, if you posted it this morning, it certainly wouldn't be in Truro this afternoon. But there you go. 10th of June, 1863. So 10th of June. Why am I doing June? 10th of January, 1863. The London Underground opened. The very first line of the London Underground opened 10th of January, 1863. It was actually open between Paddington Station and Farringdon Station. That's the little route it had. It was steam locomotives pulling carriages, wooden carriages, which were lit by gaslight. On the first day, 10th of January, 1863, that little line carried 38,000 people. And obviously it was sort of like a trial, first time, and 38,000 people on the first day. between Paddington and Farringdon proved that Londoners were up for underground travel. And the rest, as they say, is history and continues to be so with the Queen Elizabeth, with the Elizabeth line as well, that opened only a few years ago. Let's see where we get. It is a question at Q&A, Mr. Chap. Yes, Glenn, what question have you got for me? Type it in. I'll keep my eyes open as we go. And on we go. 11th of January. Someone chimed this one up earlier. 11th of January, 1879. The British invade Zululand. This was the day where Lord Chelmsford crossed the river. Those of you who've seen the film Zulu Dawn, it's dramatically portrayed, isn't it, with them crossing over into Zululand. That was actually filmed on location, although interestingly, in the film, not that you know this, but they actually crossed in real life. They crossed from Zululand into Natal in the film. Better cinema, better scenes. And but the reality was, of course, the British invaded from the British colony Natal into Zululand. I've done a shed load of videos on that. There's still more to come on the Zulu War. I find it a fascinating moment from so many different aspects. Not least, what I do want to cover, Lord Chelmsford, bit of an idiot or a man who made decisions based on the evidence he had in front of him? I bet that's going to let a few of you out now to do that one. But let's just quickly look. Hugh de Mortimer has just asked, how did the flooding affect me up in Worcester? Let me come back to that one in a moment, okay, towards the end. Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Brunel's on my list. I've got a, where's my book? I've got a great book that I inherited from my dad. Now, of course, now that I'm looking over my shoulder, I can't see the damn thing anywhere, but it's... my dad was an engineer, and he couldn't get enough of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and I think it's interesting. We've just talked about London Underground. You just mentioned Isambard Kingdom Brunel, Jen. We've talked about universal postage. People are very quick, especially on some of my videos, to leap in there and say, the British and the British Empire was all bad. Actually, there's a hell of a lot that this little nation, this little island, brought to the world. And, Harry Potter, the Beatles, postage stamps, universal postage system. That was the first one for the same flat price anywhere across a country. It's what we all now, no matter what country you go to, that is the standard, isn't it? Countries that were never part of the British Empire have that as their standard postal system. Countries that were never part of the British Empire have underground systems, underground railways. Countries all around the world have some form of income tax as well. Thank you, William Pitt the Younger. Anyway, we've had the invasion of Zululand, 12th of January, 1895. In fact, let me just see. Sorry, we're going a bit mad on the chat here. Wonder how many points or signal failures happened on the first day of the underground. Oh, actually, one of the History Chat club tribe supporters, however you want to call ourselves, one of them is actually a driver on the Central Line in London, and he shared some good stories. And but anyway, probably not many back in Victorian times. They seem to sort stuff pretty fast. Personally, wouldn't do that. Hammer Down Under. Wouldn't do Falklands. Yeah, I'm sort of with you on that one. Hammer Down Under. Thank you, Ray, for that comment. Thomas Cobbett. Yeah, thank you, John Green. I mean, I've got to remember Thomas Cobbett, especially with a surname, shared surname. You move up the rankings. You get extra brownie points for your suggestion on that one. Yeah, that's interesting. The GDP of ex-British colonies is far in excess of ex-colonies of other nations. Not sure how where you got that info from, but I'd be interested to see that one, Herod. James Burton, famous architect down in Sussex, worth a mention. Good God, do you realise this is a project for life, isn't it? That I've got here. I've got to get down the gym and start eating healthy things and piling my body with vitamins, because I think I'm still going to be here in my 90s doing this. Actually, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? YouTuber in their 90s. Not many of those kicking around. Go Sussex. Do Do I think the oh, that's an interesting question, Glenn. Do I think the Boer Wars were the beginning of the end of the British Empire? Anyone who's got opinions, shout it in here for Glenn. It's not just a Chris show, although obviously I'm holding it all together. I have done some Q&As in the past, by the way, Glenn, where I've sort of said, so what do people want to talk about? And to use the English expression, it's a tumbleweed moment. It's like, oh, okay. So that's why I keep sharing and allowing you folk just to ask questions and make comments as we go. So do I think, and everyone else leap in there, and this, it would be great if we were on Zoom and people could actually talk properly, wouldn't it? But there you go, we're not, and YouTube don't give us that Zoom or Zoom style facility. But do I think the Boer Wars were the beginning of the end of the British Empire? Interesting. Easy answer is to say yes. It was the first time the British really got stalled by an enemy and really made to work hard for a military victory in the whole sort of period from Queen Victoria at the beginning of her reign through to the end. There have been some hard moments before. Indian Mutiny, Indian Rebellion would be one. Sudan was not, was pretty hard work. The Zulus gave us a fair crack early on. The writing was on the wall, though. It was always going in one direction, really, in the Zulu War. But so that was the first time. It certainly made the British aware just how much anti-British feeling there was elsewhere in the world. Made them feel quite isolated. Prior to that, Britain sort of glorified themselves in this sort of splendid isolation. We don't need to get involved in Europe. We've got our navy, and with that, and our imperial colonies and brothers and sisters across the world, that's good enough. And I think for the first time, it rattled the British. The number one, their army wasn't necessarily as good as they thought it was. Number two, far more importantly, politically, diplomatically, they were quite exposed. And it's very interesting that within a couple of years of the Boer War finishing, Britain had signed a treaty with Japan, principally so that the Japanese Navy, which was up and coming, would sort of patrol on Britain's behalf the Pacific. And that would fundamentally, and keep the Germans in check in the Pacific. They had some colonies there, small ones, but had them. And that would allow the British to pull some of their fleet back towards Europe, towards the North Sea, to face this new up and coming enemy, Germany. Don't forget, quite a few people right up until this moment still thought France was a potential enemy. Interestingly, within 3 years of the Boer War finishing, Britain had signed the Entente Cordiale with France, and therein, effectively, became into alliance with the Russians, and there the path towards the First World War moves very quickly, doesn't it? Over 10 years from signing the Entente Cordiale. So, was it the end of the British, or beginning of the end of the British Empire? An interesting one. And the only other thing I'll add before going over to the comments is what it did do. First time ever, the sons of the empire, Canada, Australia, New Zealand principally, but some from Rhodesia, came to South Africa to fight with the British Army. It was the first time the empire had sent military forces abroad. The first time the Canadians had sent military forces abroad. I know they sent the boatmen to General Wolsey's Nile expedition in the 1880s, but they were very much there as civilian navigators. Australian small contingent from New South Wales had also ended up in that particular war. They at Suakin on the Red Sea coast in that first part of the British Sudanese wars in the 1880s. But otherwise, this was the first big time. So in one respect, some people probably came out of that thinking, wow, the empire, actually, we pulled together. So at the time, there might have been quite a few people, not least in Britain, who actually thought the empire was on the up. And of course, territorially, it ended up slightly more after the First World War, when it ended up with German East Africa and Palestine. So anyway, let's see what other people is. First World War's a turning point is Invisible Ray's view. Yeah. Tim, I love your comments, mate. They're to the side of what we're talking about from this particular question. We entered the World War One as a confident nation. After the Somme, things were different. Yeah, interesting, interesting. Certainly, what's interesting is as the years went by after the First World War, we end up by the 1960s with things like "Oh, What a Lovely War," the musical, and really, and it fed through to things like Blackadder, where there was this view that British officers were totally out of touch, living in chateaus, or senior British officers were out of touch, certainly living in chateaus, and really didn't know the what's it from their elbow, which is not was not necessarily seen like that at the time. Okay, and yeah, I studied this at university actually. Anyway, that's by the by. We're off. Let's just see about this Boer War question. Was it the beginning of the end for the British Empire? Um, Perhaps the Boer War made the Commonwealth look differently at the Brits. Interesting. Wonder what it. Genuine question. Wonder what it did for Indian the beginnings of Indian nationalism, because I guess it would suggest the Brits weren't quite as sort of top dog as maybe some Indians had thought they were post the Indian Mutiny of 1858. I don't know. I mean, guess everything makes you revalue things, doesn't it? Sid Precious. So the movie when the Brits are ambushed by the Boers was inaccurate. I'm not sure which one you mean. Are you thinking about the one at in the first Boer War, where the British are marching through and are ambushed by the Boers? That certainly happened. That was in the first Boer War. Don't want to go there. We're well over the hour now, and we're still chuntering away. So thank you very much, folks. Lions led by donkeys is the phrase used. Yeah, it is. Interestingly, actually quite a few senior British officers were killed in the First World War. And I mentioned a couple of them last night. One of them certainly. Oh lordy, which of the VC winners was it? It wasn't. But one of them from the charge of the 21st was a brigadier general and was killed in action at Gallipoli. Interestingly, another one of the officers, Lieutenant Pirrie, who had gone on the original scouting mission last night, found the gully. Didn't realise quite how many. Well, he didn't. He saw a gully. It was only after he'd gone back to report that the Mahdists reinforced it with 2,000 men. Pirrie was killed in action in Palestine, 1917, as well. Good afternoon, gents. That's right. Okay, fine. That's right, Sid. Yes, the you've just confirmed for me where the British were ambushed. It was in the First Boer War. The British fought 2 Boer Wars. British tend to talk about the Boer War as the South African War of 1899-1902. There'd been another one in 1880 where previously independent Boer republics had sort of grudgingly accepted British rule and then very quickly realised that it really was as bad as they thought it was going to be. They rebelled. And there was a short-lived war of independence, which the British came off militarily very badly from. In particular, the culmination was the Battle of Majuba, where General Coley was killed, another general who was killed in action, that in Victorian times. He was a member of Sir Garnet Wolsey's Ashanti Ring. Right. I've got 2 more dates for you. Shall we just finish the dates off? Okay. 12th of January, tomorrow, 12th of January, 1895. The National Trust is founded. Love them or hate them, and controversial sometimes, but National Trust was founded in 1895 by social reformer Octavia Hill, along with Sir Robert Hunter and Canon Hardwicke Rawnsley. And the idea was to preserve and have access to open countryside and fresh air for the working classes. Sort of good, also ever so slightly patronising and Victorian as well. But don't forget, a lot of the time, this time, large parts of the English countryside and open areas were private property. Those of you who are into your rambling will know about the Kinder Scout mass trespass in I think it was the 1930s, might be in the 20s, 1930s, where lots of ramblers went on to the Duke of Devonshire's land to prove that actually he didn't own it, or they had a right to roam, as it were. And but National Trust was formed to give people access to open countryside and fresh air from the working class cities. And within weeks of this foundation in January 1895, they'd been gifted their first piece of open countryside, actually just outside Barmouth in North Wales. And within a year, they had bought their very first property. It was the clergy house at Alfriston in Sussex. Sussex is getting a few mentions today, isn't it? But it was the clergy house in Alfriston in Sussex. They bought it for £10, and it is still a National Trust property to this day. So there you go. It's my pleasure, Sid. My pleasure. And I'll give the last one, then we'll come back to things. Okay. 13th of January, 1842. The last stand at Gandamag. Someone's just talked in here about would the two Afghan wars. Okay, yeah, but in Afghanistan, this was the first Afghan war, the first British Afghan war. British had gone into Afghanistan. I won't go through it. I've got a video about it. Actually, check it out on my site if you really want to. The last stand at Gandamag, made famous either by Lady Elizabeth Butler's paintings or Harry Flashman. Anyone who's into the Flashman novels will know Flashman he wasn't at Gandamag. He oversaw the destruction. He'd been in Kabul, however. The British had gone into Afghanistan, taken over Kabul, then tried to get out of Kabul. History repeats itself, doesn't it, folks, sometimes? But there was a major retreat from Kabul, something like 18,500. Not just troops, but camp hangers-on and their families and everything, principally Indian, actually, rather than British, were retreating from Kabul through the Afghan winter, through the winter in the mountains, being sniped at, being attacked by the Afghans all the way. And eventually, on the 13th of January, 1842, the remnants of the British Army turned and made a last stand at Gandamag. The phrase would be wiped out. Some of them were captured, including the man who'd wrapped the colour around his waist to protect it. And the Afghans thought he must be a very important person to have such a thing around his waist, and he was spared. Several of them were spared. So some came through, but the whole, it was a disaster for the British. And an interesting place. It's called the Graveyard of Empires, Afghanistan. And, the British have been there 4 times. Apart from the second time, the second and thirds weren't too bad. First was a complete disaster by the end. We went back in afterwards to try and teach the Afghans a lesson. It was brief. It was punitive. Second and thirds, and then, of course, the fourth time, we've only just recently left it. But, the Soviets didn't do well there. The Americans didn't do well there. It's an interesting place. We'd love to visit it one day, but maybe it needs to die down a little bit first, or calm down a little bit first, before I make any appearance in Afghanistan. So that's it for this week. We've got Calais lost to the French in 1588. The Battle of Ashdown. Alfred and his brother defeat with the army of Wessex, defeat the Vikings in 871. Battle of New Orleans, 1815. Income tax levied for the first time in Britain in 1799. We've got Nelson's state funeral in 1806. The penny post is introduced into Britain. First time we had any country had a uniform penny post or uniform postal service at the same price across the country. That was in 1840. 1863, the first stretch of the London Underground opened between Paddington Station and Farringdon. We had the invasion of Zululand. We had that was 1879. We got the National Trust formed in 1895, and finally 1842, the last stand at Gandamag. And to say, there's a video about that in my collection. Have a look. Put in the last stand at Gandamag history chap, and it's a reasonably short one, about 15 minutes, something like that. And hopefully you'll enjoy that. Let me just have a very, very quick look back at what everyone's saying. Glenn Hayes, culturally speaking, are the British, French and Germans still recovering from the horrors of the 2 world wars? Are we still scarred somehow? Wow, that's a good question. Golly, folk, throw in, what do you think? Are we still scarred? Are the Germans and the French scarred? Certainly the First World War scarred the French in particular. running into the Second World War. I think there's no doubt that the French didn't have the fight in them because of how much they'd suffered in the First World War, and they'd suffered both. I was in, where the hell was I? South of France somewhere on my summer holiday. No, actually, yeah, both in Nice and also in Cannes. Both of them. The monument in Nice is massive. But what's really quite sobering is the monument's massive because of the amount of names on it. The French lost a lot more men than the British lost in the First World War. And of course, they'd had a large part of the country devastated, apart from some Zeppelin raids and the German Navy, bombarding Hartlepool and Whitby. Britain had sort of not had that we hadn't had an army of occupation on British soil. Don't know what people are thinking of this. But yeah, so I think it probably has scarred. I think the British have probably never quite got over the fact that we were on the winning side, and the British still lost their empire. They were broke, and somehow, whilst they were on the winning side, when the three great victors were Great Britain, or United Kingdom, USA, and the USSR, and it was quite apparent from 1945 who the third member was of that winning coalition. And I think psychologically the British have probably never quite got over that. Yeah, that's my gut feel. Not sure that the younger generation are quite in that thing, but I think anyone from that wartime generation, anyone coming who've been influenced by that wartime generation as well. And don't forget, most of us were brought up on a diet of wartime films and things as well. So yeah, I think it probably made people very confused in Britain, actually, as to what Britain's role in the world was. And that Victorian confidence, that self-assurance, excuse me, probably call it Victorian arrogance, was knocked out of the British. Hang on, we're getting a bit of a debate about 1812. Francisco, I am sorry, mate. Yeah, this will be, I think I'll release this as recorded. I've got to play around afterwards and just say, put it up as a recording. It'll be there for you. John, lovely to see you watching this in Calgary. Quite frankly, I know I say this every time. Trying to do this, trying to find a suitable time for everyone is never going to work. Those of you who were on a little bit earlier, you know that we had a guy from New Zealand. It was 3 a.m. in the morning in New Zealand. He was just going to bed then. He'd had enough. The history chap had done him in. Now you've got you're watching this watching this while in the gym in Calgary. So when's a good time? For my North American friends, probably somewhere at 9 o'clock at night. UK time would be good, maybe even later. 2 in the morning UK time would be great for my North American friends. Probably actually 2 a.m. would be good for the New Zealanders as well. Most of my British, Irish mob, you won't be up at 2 a.m. in the morning watching me. So when's a good time? When's a good time? Sorry, folks. 1812, well known in Canada. Yes, it is. 1812 war. Really interesting. The phrase I came across was the Americans think they won it, the British haven't got a clue about it, and the Canadians know they did win it. A lot of tongue-in-cheek comment there, but yeah, there's some truth there as well. Certainly the bit about the British not knowing about it, that's definitely true. John, you're originally from Pershore. Yeah, they had a close shave with the flood waters this week. And oh, by the way, someone asked earlier, how's the flooding in Worcester? Worcester pretty well flooded. If you know Worcester at all, the race course, the cricket ground were all underwater. Several streets were closed off right up by the River Severn. I'm okay. I'm a couple of miles away from the city centre, up a hill and then over a bit. So I haven't seen anything, but it's been pretty hairy down in Tewkesbury. They've been saying Tewkesbury flooding is the worst in nearly 20 years. So there you go. 10:30 p.m. in Western Australia. Okay. James Penny, you make a really good point. But Hollywood movies have always tended to talk, fundamentally, it was Hollywood films are about Americans principally fighting in the Second World War against normally Germans. It started to become a little bit more Japanese. Japanese been there, but Letters to Iwo Jima from Iwo Jima and that have sort of made Japan and the Pacific War more of a a thought process in America than purely fighting Hitler all the time. British British films always about chirpy British, heroic British people. Chirpy. There's always a chirpy, a grizzly old sergeant and a chirpy Cockney chappie and someone from Scotland and a very stiff upper lipped English officer. That tended to be sort of like English British Second World War films, didn't it? What was interesting, I was in last year. I was in Italy. I was in. I happened to be in Venice, and I came across a war memorial in Venice for the First World War. And you suddenly realize, it was all the names from the Italians came into the First World War in 1915. But you suddenly realize that actually there are other nations in Europe that remember the First World War and obviously the Second World War as well, had played big parts in their own ways. The Dutch didn't play as big a part as the British and Americans. Let's be honest, the Dutch are a lot smaller nation. But interestingly, both the Dutch and the Norwegian navies, as well as the French Navy and the Polish Navy, were all involved at D-Day. But you'd never know that from any of the Longest Day or or Saving Private Ryan or anything like that, would you? And likewise, we forget just how many people from the British Empire, British Commonwealth, were involved in the Second World War, playing different roles. Some of which have been pushed up a bit, like a lot of the Caribbean involvement and that. But we tend to forget. Obviously, the Canadian involvement's very, very there. Australian in the Far East. Indians, of course, massive. Do you know, at the end of the Second World War, the Indian Army was the largest volunteer army in the world. It wasn't the largest army. I think the Soviets were probably ahead, but the Soviets was all conscripted, wasn't it? But Indian Army, largest volunteer army in the world. I've heard people say in Britain, why they're wearing poppies. There's your answer, isn't it? Those of you who've watched my video about Kohima and things will also know just what a role Indian troops played in the Second World War. But also, I always think the South Africans and also the Rhodesians and the roles they played in the Second World War. And my father always had this view, which is like it's very, British are very quick sometimes to forget their allies and their kith and kin when a new set of political things come along. And he wasn't just talking about Rhodesia; he happened to be mentioning, joining the EEC at the time, and how we, to a certain extent, threw the Australian and New Zealand farming industries, under the bus so that we could join the EEC. And strange enough, we now seem to be rather surprised. And Boris, when he was doing his post-Brexit stuff, seemed rather surprised that New Zealand and that didn't desperately want to become part of a trading bloc with Britain anymore. You do the dirty on people, it comes back to bite you on the backside sometimes, doesn't it? Just whizzing down here, lunchtime in Spain. Wow, nice one. I was curious if England has experienced any tornadoes or hurricanes during its history. Harry, yes, it has. There have been several, but Harry, have a look. And I know you read a lot of, you watch, sorry, a lot of my videos. Have a look for the one that was I've done one about the Great Storm of 1703. It was a storm that swept into the southwest of England, massive storm, not as strong as the storm of the 1980s, which is quite famous, but the loss of life was huge. Took out Royal Navy ships. There was a Royal Navy potential invasion or invasion of Cadiz, or an operation to go to Cadiz. Basically, it was taken out, not by the Spanish Navy, but by the British weather. So, yeah, there have been. Sometime back in the Middle Ages, I can't remember when, early Middle Ages, there was a tornado reported through London as well. But Tim says the Belgian Navy were at D-Day as well. Thank you for that, Tim. I was thinking of the people off the top of my head, not trying to praise or dish other nations. Oh, interesting, Harper. You were taught exclusively about the Poles at university. You were taught exclusively about the Poles at the Battle of Britain. Yeah, and of course, if you watch the Battle of Britain film, it lists all the people at the end, of which the Poles were a significant number, but so were the Free French, so were the Czechs. And again, there were South Africans there. The one I really love, those of you who's watched the Battle of Britain film, I still think it's a great film. I'm talking about the Battle of Britain film, the old one, not the one that was recently done with Hollywood, where the guy flew for the RAF, and then ends up at Pearl Harbor. Okay, Hollywood at its very best. We're talking about the old one with Michael Caine and all those people in it. There was forgotten his name. I've just had a brain freeze, folks. But there was the guy who basically had a go at the young pilots and said that if they'd only been up in Spitz for 7 hours, he was going to take them back out there. And Owen is the one as well who tells the German officers they got to clear up the mess. Give them at his airfield when it was all bombed. And he said, "Where are you taking them?" And they said, "Oh, we're taking them to the officers' mess." And he said, "No, you're not. Give them a bloody shovel." And they said, and he said they made this mess. They can clear it up. And someone said, the skipper. No, it wasn't Christopher Plummer. Sorry, that he has a go at someone as well for doing a roll over the field, doesn't he? Sid, I'm not going there, mate. But anyway, Battle of Britain, Sailor Milan, South African fighter race. Absolutely. Robert Shaw, thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah Jane. Robert Shaw. Okay, Robert Shaw's character in the Battle of Britain is based upon South African fighter race Sailor Milan. Sailor Milan, fascinating character, fighter race in the Second World War, went home to South Africa at the end of the Second World War, where the Nationalist Party came to power. Jan Smuts lost general election, and the National Party started to introduce apartheid. Sailor Milan was the leading light in an organization called the Torch Commando, which were white Second World War veterans opposed to the nationalists and the apartheid regime. Interesting. Great story. No one really talks about that. What's really weird is that he was a cousin, I think it was the second cousin, of the South African nationalist prime minister introducing apartheid, D.F. Malan. So Sailor Milan, great story. Just always fancy doing one about the Torch Commando and Sailor Milan, because I just think, it's a cool one to tell, isn't it? Because people forget that. People also forget that, not every Afrikaner supported apartheid either. Yeah, obviously enough did to elect the nationalist government, but not everyone did. Peter Fox, I didn't realize how many Indian troops were part of the Allied forces in World War I until I saw the names on the Menin Gate. Yeah. Again, and it gets me a little bit when I get people on YouTube saying, that Indians basically saying they were disgraced, they were serving the colonial masters, and they were basically, they go off on one. And I think, number one, it goes back to that whole perspectives thing that we were talking about much earlier in this session, which is we all make decisions based on what we think is good at the time. Yeah. They obviously did. We don't know all the reasons why they joined the British Indian Army. Could have been patriotism, could have been misplaced patriotism, could have been because actually the family was skint, and actually you might as well join the army as anything. And let's be honest, most of the British Victorian Army had a lot of men like that in it. There were people running away from, the defenders of Rorke's Drift. William Allen was, people say did he join the army to get away? William Allen VC at Rorke's Drift. Did he get away from? Was he running away from? Basically, he'd made a lady pregnant in South Wales or Monmouthshire area. I don't know if that's true or not, but people were running away from things. That could have been the case with various people in the British Indian Army. But here's the other interesting thing: for all those Indian nationalists out there, when you think about all those men, think about what I talked about with the Second World War, biggest volunteer army in the world, fighting for the King Emperor George VI, traitors to India. Okay, numerically, a lot of those people must be your relatives. And are you going to airbrush them out of history or not? We don't have to be proud of everyone in our families or what they did, but you can't stop history being history. Oh, that's almost sounded like a political rant there, didn't it? But it does get me that sometimes people see history in very, very simplistic terms, and just like our own lives, we've all got reasons why we've married the person we did, or we got divorced, or anything else, and we will believe and we will argue till the cows come home we made the right decisions. our grandchildren, our grandchildren might be looking at us. Our grandchildren might look at us in, or two generations down and say, "What, you did this, or you believe that?" And we'll say, "Yeah," because there didn't seem to be anything wrong with it at the time. We've got Robert Shaw going on here. What are my thoughts on The Greatest Raid by Clarkson? Need to think about that a bit more while since I saw it, if I'm honest. Gandhi recruited. I'm just reading here, Michael, and trying to work out. I think you've put a couple of typos or something in, but Gandhi basically got India contributed to the war effort. Thought that India would lead to Indian home rule. Yes, he did. He certainly did in the First World War. I think he was slightly less inclined in the Second, but nevertheless, yeah. And India, in many respects, and Indians probably felt shortchanged after the First World War. And probably gave galvanized some thinking people in India to join the independence movement. That's very possible. Britain probably misplayed a few, didn't we? Shall I just let the cat out the bag? Easter Rising, 1916. Do you know most people in Ireland, when the Easter Rising started, didn't support the rising? Then, of course, the British decided in rather high-handed manner. And here we have, by the way, those of you who watched my Battle of Atbara, General Maxwell, who's commanding one of the Egyptian divisions brigades at the Battle of Atbara. General Maxwell ends up, or he wasn't General Atbara, ends up being a general, ends up in Dublin in 1916. And it was the draconian measures the British took, not least with the surrendered the nationalist fighters from the post office in Dublin, that actually changed opinion very rapidly in Ireland against British rule. I mean, let's face it, most of them wanted some sort of home rule anyway, but and galvanised very much behind the nationalists and Sinn Féin. You make decisions, you think you're making them right, cock it up. We've all done it. I'm sure my ex-wife would tell me that one. Coghill and what's it? Were they cowards? Oh, Invisible Ray. Coghill and Melville saving the colours from the Battle of Isandlwana in Zululand. Don't forget, invasion of Zululand, 11th January 1879. Were they cowards? Oh, personally, no, I don't think they were. Certainly, General Wolseley, Sir Garnet Wolseley, didn't think they deserved the Victoria Cross, and they should have died with their men. On the other hand, was it wrong to try and save the colour? Don't know. Yeah. Was it wrong to leave on a horse when your infantry were definitely not going to get out the camp? Don't know. There's some interesting bits. They certainly never left the camp together, by all accounts. There's no accounts of that. Those of you, by the way, who love Anglo-Zulu War, really suggest if you're on Facebook, join Ian Knight's Zulu War, Anglo-Zulu War Facebook group. Really good debates in there. Fantastic stuff. Loads of very knowledgeable people. Lots of people who travelled to the battlefields. Lots of people who've been studying the Zulu Wars and only the Zulu Wars for donkey's years. A real mine of information. That's a freebie. I'm not on anything from Ian. Just think it's a great site. I've been a member of lots of Facebook groups. Some of them are pretty tough. The Sea Wolves. Do you like the Wild Geese? I like the Wild Geese as a film. Yeah. And of course, it was a moment in time. It was based very much on the mercenary activities in Congo after it had been given a very hurried independence by Belgium in the early 1960s. An interesting one. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam. Studied that for my degree, or part of my degree. I'm trying to focus only on British, and that's only because, quite frankly, I've now been talking for an hour and crumbs. An hour and 3/4, or an hour and definitely over an hour and a half, and I've only talked about British history. And so imagine, in the nicest way, Martin, if I started delving into French history, French colonial history, American history. The other one, how about we go back a bit in time? Roman history. Whoa, I could be all over the show, and the bits that you love that I do actually will become quite small. because this week's video is about the Victorian British military escapade somewhere or other. Next week it's about the Romans. The week afterwards it's about the French attempting to establish the emperor, a proxy emperor in Mexico. Week afterwards we're going to talk about Wyatt Earp. The week after that we're going to talk about the Vikings in England. Now we're going to talk about, can you see how it could get really disparate? If I can find a way of either creating more time, getting rid of all the crap that I do so I can just tell stories, or work in collaboration with other people. And interestingly, Christian Parkinson, Redcoat Military History, and I are talking about something like that. Also talking to someone who's an active member of the Sealed Knot in the UK about we'll bring some of their expertise about the English Civil War to bear as well. So there you go. What are my thoughts on the sinking of the Hood? Don't really have any thoughts, Glenn, but it's definitely it's on my to-do list. The Hood, and also, of course, the sinking of the Prince of Wales off Malaya at the beginning of the Second World War, or early on the Pacific War. Yeah. Martin, I don't know if you come across my video. I did a video about the British in Vietnam in 1945, and it's one of those controversial ones. I mean, obviously, Brits. The reality at that moment in time, was that they had the Viet Minh on the run. Viet Minh, obviously, at that stage, were nowhere near as sophisticated as they would end up being, nor did they have a communist government on the borders of Vietnam supplying arms at that stage. Don't forget, Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalists were still controlling most of southern China in the Chinese Civil War. So the British moment in Vietnam could have changed things if we'd stayed there, been allowed to push it home, rather than allowing the French to come in with their policies and their reintegration of the French Empire. The reinstigation of the French Empire might have been different. Don't forget, of course, the British also helped out the Dutch regain control in what's called the Dutch East Indies at the end of the Second World War, which is now Indonesia. I've got an Indonesian friend, and they've got some views on that. They're not, they haven't got anything. I mean, he supports Liverpool in the football, and lives in Britain, so no problems there. But actually, that idea that their view of the British and British involvement in Indonesia. Why did you get involved and allow prop up the Dutch regime that needed kicking out? Interesting. Check out the video, Martin. It's quite a good little one. Only downside, there weren't many images that I could use, so I end up repeating a lot of the images. I got a bit of flack for that. But part of the problem in history is we don't, unless you've got loads of cine film like Mark Felton has. Don't know how he gets all that stuff, by the way. I mean, I don't know if he pays a fortune or it's all royalty free. Haven't got a clue. But I'm guessing he's too big to be doing it on the sly. Someone would have found him by now. Do I think that the empire still exists through banking? Oh, what a great question. Banking, maybe. Commerce, yeah. Don't forget that actually the British, in one respect, the British Empire started as it was all commercial. The idea of ruling a large landmass didn't excite the Brits, particularly until the late part of the Queen Victoria's Empire, when they started to suddenly compare themselves to the Roman Empire. Early on, it was all about trade, and you either wanted to control where you were getting raw materials from. You might want to secure a market, but really securing a market meant actually having good trade deals. You didn't actually need to conquer China. You wanted good trade deals, which is fundamentally we could ship everything into China and pay no taxes doing so, including opium. So a lot of the time, the empire was very much driven as much around trade as it was about having this Roman Empire style thing that controlled a large part of the world. Ended up doing so, of course, but that was never its original. It was always about making money. It was always about making money, and everything else came afterwards, really. James Penny, there's a good documentary regarding the Bismarck and the sinking of the Hood on History Hit YouTube channel. Go and check it out. Good channel, History Hit. Again, I don't watch it very often. I have to be honest, unless it's specific to the research I'm trying to do. I really don't have time. As well, I do have try and have a social life as well. I really don't have time to be watching too many history channels on YouTube. As I say, I'm a subscriber to Mark Felton. I'm a subscriber to Redcoat Military History. But yep, go and have a look at that. Can you talk about the amethyst, invisible ray? Do you want me to actually talk about the amethyst now, or did you want me to have done a video? Because I've done a video about the amethyst, the Yangtze incident. I did it October, November time. Go back and have a little look. But it's called, I think it's called The Real Story Behind the Yangtze Incident, or The Real Story. Yeah, it must be The Real Story of the Yangtze Incident, Invisible Ray. Have a look at that. Glenn's contributing. Sid, you've raised an interesting one there about the Luddites being sentenced to death or being transported obviously principally to Australia, Tasmania, for smashing up weaving machines. Bit harsh, most certainly was harsh. No doubt about that. Some interesting stories about British transportation. The whole Australia thing. Don't forget, Australia only became a transportation destination because the place of choice, the American colonies, had just kicked us out. So there was a whole bit through the back end of the 1600s through the early 1700s of Brits being sent as convicts to America. I've got the figures somewhere because I had it in my King James I talk that I recently did, private talk that I recently did. And yeah, it was a fair few. And you also had indentured servants, which are effectively almost like slave servants, going to North America and also to Barbados. And don't forget, Cromwell sent Irish people who he had fought in his Irish campaigns at the end of the English, or at the end of the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, Civil War. He sent them to Barbados. As indeed, of course, someone mentioned Sedgemoor. Sedgemoor, a lot of the prisoners from Sedgemoor, the rebels who had supported the Duke of Monmouth at the Monmouth Rising against King James II of England, they ended up in Barbados as well. And they certainly, the Irish community did form a distinctive group in Barbados. But I always wonder, whether some of the West Indian accents have a contributing factor from those sort of people arriving from Britain, because they would have been working alongside the early slaves, black slaves. And you wonder whether some of the patois from different parts of the Caribbean could have been influenced by those sort of, that sort of interaction. And that maybe, I don't know, but maybe there is almost like little Irishisms or indeed West Countryisms in places like Barbados that you don't get in somewhere like the Bahamas or Jamaica. I don't know. I'd be interested. Love to hear it. And anyone who's got any experience of the Caribbean, love to hear. Yeah, that might just be a complete barking mad idea. Gut feel says there's probably something there somewhere. Invisible Ray. I mean, English people had to survive horrendous conditions. Certainly, if you were a convict, you did. But working class conditions. A book I was pleasantly surprised. I read last year, Black Gold. This Black Gold is by Jeremy Paxman, and if you're interested, it's about the history of the British coal mining industry. And really, I thought a really good book. I mean, Jeremy Paxman's someone I always think a very bright man. Probably the sort of smart aleck who'll tell you, you've got small details wrong. And he's just that sort of, there's a way he comes across on University Challenge, or used to come across on University Challenge. I always thought, I don't know if I like you or not. Black Gold by Jeremy Paxman, great read. And sure as heck, working class people in the mining areas had a pretty crap existence. And it came into pretty recent times, into photographic history. Okay, and yeah, fascinating. And I'm not trying to. I'm not in this game. Okay, of our coal miners were every bit as bad as a slave who was being branded and raped by their slave master in Barbados or Guyana. Guyana was particularly bad, but I think it's when people talk about, all Brits seem to live off the back of slavery. I'm not sure that's totally true. I think certainly some people did very nicely out of slavery. My gut feel is they're the same people that probably owned the coal mines and had, ultimately owned some of the stately homes, I'm sure. But they were doing quite nicely out of their British investments too. And certainly, if you look at some of the working conditions in some of the original textile mills, they weren't too clever either. Where are we at? Oh, Invisible Ray. That's a really cool. Have I seen the mini-series Troubles about an Anglo-Irish landlord rapidly losing his grip on his land as the years of terror approach? No, but I bet it's fascinating. But it's fascinating. Look, folk, are there any other questions? Because hey, I've got more things to do. I've got to start planning this Civil War series for a start that I've got coming up in the future. Anyone who enjoys my work, by all means, sign up for my weekly newsletter. It's over at thehistorychap.com. In the newsletter, I'll always tell you when my latest videos come out as well. And by the way, I've got a podcast channel as well. So if you're someone who's out gardening, walking the dog, driving on a train, and actually find YouTube a bit of a pain in the backside to follow, but you actually love to have the stories, then by all means jump on my podcast channel as well. Strange enough, it's called The History Chap. You can get it Amazon, Spotify, etc. So by all means, have a look at that as well. Just one quick down, last few things. James Penny. There was a Welsh ship called the Mimosa, which set sail from Liverpool in the 1860s and settled in Argentina. Can you imagine what their accent's like now? Well, it reminds me, James, that you may be aware that there was the Welsh community that settled in Patagonia, southern Argentina. They left Wales in the 19th century to preserve Welsh identity, their Welsh culture. They believed it was being being taken over. Wales was being taken over by the English, and Welsh culture was disappearing. And they went to Patagonia and they set up their own little isolated communities in Patagonia. They're now fully integrated in Argentine society, and it's slightly bizarre. They still have Eisteddfods and things like that in Patagonia, but you've always got this slightly weird thing that the man in charge of the Eisteddfod is Juan Sebastian Evans or something like that. I just think it's just one of those wonderful little quirks. But Scouse Argentinians, it's just that beats them, doesn't it? Thank you very much, James, for sharing that. Thanks, Invisible Ray. Yeah, Jamaica, interesting place. Being British, Oliver Cromwell. That's how the Brits got Jamaica. Oliver Cromwell seized it, so ruled it for over 300 years. Interesting. A lot of interesting stories there, especially about the Maroon rebellions. Where else are we at? Great time. Thanks, mate. My pleasure, Francisco. I think it's time to all head off towards the weekend, wherever we are in the world, or head off for lunch for those of us or those of you who are over in North America. Thanks, Tim, for joining me today. Thank you, Jen. My pleasure, Hammer Down Under. Parts of Wales have Italian populations due to the wars. Yes, thank you very much indeed for that, QA Library. And of course, don't forget, after the war, heavy Polish contingents in parts of Britain as well. Look, folks, that's where we're at the end of a week where we had Calais lost to the French, Battle of Ashdown. Alfred and his brother defeat the Vikings in Berkshire with the army of Wessex. We had the Battle of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson defeats the British quite significantly in the War of 1812-1815. We had William Pitt the Younger introducing income tax temporarily for the French. Strange that it's still here and we're not fighting the French, but there you go. We had Nelson's state funeral. Penny post, the penny black, introduced first postage stamp, first uniform postage system in the world, same cost wherever you sent the post in the country. We had the London Underground opening. Who'd have thought that? 1863, 160 years ago this week, the London Underground opened for the first time. And as someone said, I wonder if there were delays. Invasion of Zululand, my passion for the Zulu Wars. National Trust founded in 1895, and in 1842, the last stand at Gandamag in the very first British adventure into Afghanistan, as recorded by Harry Flashman. the greatest historian and cad of all time. So there you go, folks. A week in British history. It's been great fun. I thought we'd keep it to about 40 minutes today. What a joke. Okay. We've ended up at something more like an hour and 40 minutes. Hour and 40, hour and 50 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly have. I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you ever so much for your support, your ongoing support, your super chats, your super donations, joining my members clubs, and indeed subscribing and commenting on my videos. Thank you ever so much. Have a lovely weekend. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon, hopefully this time next week, but with a couple of videos to be released in the meantime. Take care.